Jacob stood outside La Lumiere, the most elegant restaurant in the city, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The glowing chandeliers inside reflected off the pristine glass doors, casting a golden light that made everything look magical, almost unreal. He adjusted the collar of his only decent shirt, one he normally saved for church or job interviews. Tonight, it was for something far scarier, a blind date. He clutched a daisy wrapped in tissue paper. It wasn't expensive, but it was sincere, and sincerity was all Jacob had to offer. He took a deep breath, whispered to himself, "You can do this," and stepped inside. Immediately, he felt the weight of the atmosphere. Soft piano music drifted across the air like silk, and the scent of rosemary and freshly baked bread warmed the room. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried crystal glasses and silver trays with precision. The guests were dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, their conversations gentle yet confident, voices of people who belonged here. Jacob, however, did not belong here. At least, that was what the voice in his head kept insisting. Yet tonight was his chance to step out of the life he knew, the night shifts, the storage closet lunches, the lonely walks home at dawn. His friend from work had set him up on this blind date, insisting the girl was kind-hearted and wouldn't care that he was a janitor. His eyes scanned the room. Table 7, his friend had told him. She'll be wearing a blue dress and waiting with a glass of red wine. There, near the window, was a woman in a stunning blue dress, her dark hair flowing over her shoulders, a glass of wine in hand. She offered a gentle smile when their eyes met. Jacob's nerves melted slightly. He walked toward her, his steps careful, his grip tightening around the daisy. As he approached, he failed to notice the elegantly dressed board members seated nearby, or the poised woman at the head of their table, a woman with calm, commanding eyes. The CEO of Dalton Enterprises, Amelia Dalton, was in the middle of a strategic merger discussion. Her attention, however, shifted when she noticed Jacob, a young man wearing a hopeful smile rather than a proud one. Jacob stopped at the blue dress table, heart fluttering. "Hi," he said softly, offering the daisy. "I hope I'm not too late." The woman blinked in surprise. Her eyes flicked to the flower, then to Jacob's warm, honest face. For a brief second, she seemed confused, but then she smiled kindly, almost relieved. "No, not late at all," she replied, though her voice held a note of uncertainty he didn't quite detect. Jacob sat down quickly, grateful that his trembling knees could finally rest. Around them, conversation quieted as some diners turned curious eyes toward this unexpected pair. Amelia Dalton, the CEO, leaned back slightly, intrigued. She noticed the janitor logo faintly visible on Jacob's worn jacket sleeve and watched him with interest, not judgment. Jacob didn't see the stares. He only felt the pounding of his heart and the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the night his life would change. What he didn't know was that it already had. Just not in the way he imagined. Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he placed the daisy gently on the table. The woman in the blue dress, whom he still believed to be his blind date, offered a polite smile, though her eyebrows remained faintly furrowed. Jacob mistook this for shyness, not confusion. To calm his nerves, he attempted humor. "I was so nervous walking in," he said softly, "I thought the doorman might check my heartbeat instead of my reservation." The woman let out a light laugh. "Well, your heart seems to be working just fine." That small laugh gave Jacob courage. "I'm Jacob," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated a moment, then shook it. "Isabella." Her tone was courteous, but her eyes flicked past him, toward the table just behind Jacob, where the CEO and her executives sat. Jacob didn't notice. His nervousness was fading, replaced by an unexpected peace. He looked around at the opulence of the restaurant. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've cleaned places like this many times, but I never thought I'd be sitting at a table instead of scrubbing under one." Isabella's smile softened. That wasn't a line. That was a truth. From the adjacent table, Amelia Dalton paused mid-conversation. She subtly signaled her executives to lower their voices. Her attention was now fully on the young man who had just admitted something most people would be embarrassed to say. But there was no shame in Jacob's voice, only humility. "Do you work nearby?" Isabella asked, curiosity growing. "I work at Dalton Enterprises," he said. Several executives turned their heads sharply. Amelia's eyes widened. Jacob continued, unaware of the sudden stillness in the room. I'm on the night shift. Maintenance and cleaning, not the glamorous side of things. He smiled with a hint of pride. But it matters. I always think. Every CEO deserves to walk into a spotless office. It means they can start their day fresh. So, in some way, I help make that happen. A quiet hush fell over the restaurant. The executives exchanged glances. Was he trying to impress someone? But Amelia could see the truth. He meant every word. There was no attempt at flattery, no awareness that the very CEO he spoke of was sitting just feet away. Isabella leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. You speak about your job like it's a calling. Jacob shrugged lightly. My mother always says, if you can't do something with wealth, do it with heart. He smiled as a memory flickered through his eyes. This morning, I helped Mr. Turner in accounting. His back was hurting, so I carried his boxes to his car. He tried to tip me, but I told him the smile on his face was enough. He said I made his whole week. The executives fell completely silent. Amelia's expression softened. Something about Jacob's words reminded her of a time long before her success, when kindness had been the only currency she could afford. Isabella's face changed from confusion to admiration. You seem like someone who sees people, not positions, she said. Jacob nodded. Titles don't make us important. What we do for others does. Across the room, hearts stirred. The CEO, known for being unshakable, found herself smiling, genuinely, deeply, for the first time in months. And Jacob, he simply continued speaking, unaware that his simple truth was already changing the direction of his life, one heartfelt word at a time. Jacob's voice trailed off as a waiter approached the table, his expression caught between confusion and alarm. Excuse me, sir, the waiter whispered discreetly, leaning close. I believe you might be at the wrong table. Jacob blinked, his heart stopping for a moment. The room seemed to tilt. I'm here for a blind date. Table 7. The waiter's eyes widened. He pointed subtly across the room. At another table, a woman sat alone, glancing anxiously at the entrance, instead of at Jacob. She was also in a blue dress, lighter in shade, holding a glass of red wine. Jacob's throat tightened. Isabella suddenly smiled with relief. Oh, that makes sense. I thought there must be some mistake, but you spoke so kindly, I didn't want to embarrass you. Embarrass. The word echoed in Jacob's mind like a hammer striking glass. The executives at the nearby table exchanged looks of surprise. Some smirked, others whispered, but one face showed neither amusement nor judgment, only curiosity and warmth. Amelia Dalton, the CEO, set down her wine glass. Jacob stood quickly, almost knocking over his chair. I am so sorry, he said, mortified. I didn't mean to interrupt your evening. Before he could retreat, he heard a calm voice. You didn't interrupt anything, the CEO said. Jacob turned. Their eyes met for the first time. Amelia's gaze was steady, kind, and entirely focused on him. His breath caught. He recognized her instantly, from corporate posters, business magazines, and the occasional glimpse in the executive hallway. The woman whose office he polished. The woman whose name was spoken with a mix of reverence and fear. Please, she said, gesturing to the empty chair at her table. Won't you join us? Jacob froze. Ma'am, I'm just a janitor. I shouldn't be sitting here. A soft smile touched Amelia's lips. That's precisely why you should. Her words hung in the air. A collective silence followed. One of the executives, a stern man in a navy suit, frowned. Ms. Dalton, we were discussing the merger. And we will continue, she replied smoothly, but tonight, I'm more interested in hearing from someone who speaks from the heart instead of rehearsed talking points. The man fell silent. All eyes turned to Jacob. His face burned with embarrassment, yet something inside him, something stronger than fear, urged him to stay. Slowly, hesitantly, he took the offered seat. Amelia leaned forward. You said you work nights. At Dalton Enterprises. Yes, ma'am, Jacob replied softly. I started last year. It was the only job I could get without a degree. And yet, she said thoughtfully, you speak with more vision than most people I've hired with Ivy League diplomas. Jacob's brow furrowed in disbelief. I'm just doing what I can, ma'am. My mother is disabled. I support her. College wasn't possible, but I haven't given up. I still study online during my breaks. A murmur rippled through the table. The executives glanced at each other. Some with surprise, some with discomfort. Amelia's voice was soft, but powerful. Jacob, she said, your circumstances do not define your potential. Emotion caught in Jacob's throat. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not a teacher, not a manager, and certainly not someone like her. For the first time that night, Jacob realized, this wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. Jacob sat uneasily at the CEO's table, his heart pounding so loudly it almost drowned out the soft piano music filling the restaurant. The executives looked at him with a mix of confusion and disbelief, some even irritation. But Amelia Dalton, the CEO, gazed at him with genuine interest, as though he were the most important person in the room. He cleared his throat nervously. Ma'am, I don't mean to interrupt your dinner. Really, I should go. Amelia raised a gentle hand. Jacob, she said calmly, you haven't interrupted anything. In fact, you've added something this table has been missing for a long time, authenticity. Jacob blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? He asked quietly. Amelia leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. We sit here every week, she said, glancing briefly at the executives around her, discussing profit margins, strategies, projections. Important things, yes, but tonight, for the first time, someone spoke of people, not profits. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Jacob lowered his eyes. I didn't mean to preach, he murmured. Amelia smiled. You didn't. You reminded us of something we all knew once, but forgot. A hush fell over the table. Isabella, still sitting nearby, watched the scene unfold with awe, as if she were witnessing something life-changing. Because she was. Jacob hesitated. His hands gripped the edge of the table. It's just, people, matter, he said softly. Titles, money, those things fade. But kindness stays. Amelia nodded slowly, her eyes gleaming with emotion. Tell me, Jacob, she said, why do you still have hope? Despite everything you've been through. Jacob paused, his gaze drifting, as if looking back in time. When I was a kid, he began, we didn't have much. My mom worked 2 jobs, even when her health started failing. One day, I found her sitting alone, crying because she couldn't afford my school shoes. I told her, I didn't need shoes. I would walk barefoot if it meant she didn't have to suffer. His voice cracked slightly. He steadied himself. That night, he continued, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said, Jacob, the world may take your money, your time, even your strength. But never let it take your heart. So, I guess that's why I keep smiling. Because kindness is the one thing I can always give, even when I have nothing. A deep silence followed, not the kind born of discomfort, but of reverence. The executives lowered their eyes, humbled. Isabella pressed a hand over her heart. And Amelia exhaled softly, as though releasing years of tension. She spoke gently. Jacob, do you know why I built Dalton Enterprises? Jacob shook his head. Because, she said, once upon a time, I was just like you. Cleaning floors in a building I couldn't afford to walk into as a guest. Someone saw me, not for my job, but for my character. And that changed my life. Jacob's eyes widened. I see that same character in you, Amelia said softly. And character can't be taught. Skills can. Degrees can be earned. But integrity, compassion, that is rare. Tears burned at the back of Jacob's eyes, though he fought to hold them back. I would like, she said, pausing for a moment, to offer you a place in my leadership development program. Fully sponsored. A direct mentorship under me, if you're willing. The words hit Jacob like a wave. He froze, breathless. The executives at the table stared in disbelief. But Amelia's expression was steady, unwavering, full of conviction. Jacob could barely whisper, why me? Because, she replied, smiling warmly, true leaders don't rise by stepping on others. They rise by lifting others. And I think it's time the world saw what a leader like you can do. Jacob sat there in stunned silence, his life no longer defined by what he had been, but by what he was now being called to become. Jacob sat frozen, as if time itself had paused to let his heart catch up with what he had just heard. The restaurant, once overwhelming and intimidating, now felt like a sacred space, where fate had quietly taken him by the hand and led him to the moment that could change everything. I don't know what to say, Jacob finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Amelia Dalton smiled at him, not as a powerful CEO speaking to an employee, but as a mentor recognizing potential. You've already said everything that matters tonight, Jacob. Your kindness spoke for you. Tears welled in Jacob's eyes, tears he had long trained himself to hide. Life had taught him to be strong, to never show weakness. But tonight, he realized something powerful. Kindness was not weakness, it was strength in its purest form. He glanced around the table. The executives who once looked at him with confusion now looked at him with respect. Isabella, his mistaken date, smiled warmly, as if she had just witnessed something extraordinary and was grateful she had been part of it. Jacob swallowed hard, trying to steady his emotions. I never thought someone like you would notice someone like me, he admitted, his voice shaking. All my life, I believed that people like me were meant to stay in the shadows, to be invisible. Amelia leaned forward, her expression filled with sincerity. You were never invisible, Jacob. The world simply didn't know where to look. Those words struck deep into Jacob's soul. He had spent years believing that dreams were for other people, for those born with means, with connections, with the luxury to pursue their passions. But tonight shattered that belief. Tonight, a janitor had been seen, not for his job title, but for his heart. Amelia reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek, embossed envelope. This is not charity, she said firmly as she placed it in front of him. This is an investment, in you, in your future, in the kind of leadership our world desperately needs. Jacob opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was an official offer, scholarship funding, a mentorship contract, and a direct path into the leadership program of Dalton Enterprises. Tears finally spilled from his eyes. I accept, Jacob said, his voice breaking. Not because I want a better life for myself, but because I want to be the kind of man who lifts others, just as you've lifted me tonight. Amelia nodded, pride shining in her eyes. And that, she said softly, is exactly why you were chosen. The restaurant, unaware of the enormity of what had just taken place, continued its elegant hum. But for Jacob, the world had shifted. The blind date disaster he had feared became the most meaningful encounter of his life. As he stood to leave, Amelia extended her hand. Welcome to your future, Jacob. Jacob looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. He didn't just shake her hand. He clasped it with both of his, not as an employee to a superior, but as a soul accepting its purpose. In that moment, Jacob understood something beautiful. Sometimes, the wrong table leads you to the right destiny. Sometimes, what feels like a mistake, is actually a miracle in disguise. He stepped out of the restaurant that night not as Jacob the janitor, but as Jacob, the future leader, the believer in kindness, the proof that humility can open doors no key ever could. And as the cool night air touched his face, he smiled to himself with newfound certainty. This wasn't the end of his story, it was only the beginning.